Wonderful. That was not me, but it's that time of the year again. Economy, parliament, and money. In short, centers budget for the year. A lot has changed in 2022. In fact, over the last couple of years leading up to 2022, COVID receded, but the war escalated. Rates zoomed, but tech valuations have taken a hit, and many jobs have gotten washed out in global layoffs. The budget was presented yesterday, and several announcements directly or indirectly related to real estate and infrastructure industry were made. The budget sought to build on the roadmap laid down by previous budgets, focusing on inclusive development, fostering growth, and job creation while keeping the macroeconomy in a stable yet growth-oriented mode. From JLL, I'm Rahul Arora. I'm the co-host for this evening. We have a very experienced panel of leaders from leading real estate organizations to share their views about the budget session. Panelists will possibly be able to take some questions if time permits at the end of it. So if participants have, other attendees have any questions, please do drop those in the chat box, and we'll pick them up in the comment box as we come towards the end of the session. So let me introduce the panel now. We have with us Tina Rawla, a Managing Director and Chief Financial Officer for Hines, Sudarshan Lodha, co-founder Strata, Sanjeev Dasgupta, Executive Director and CEO CapitaLand, Arpit Singh, Managing Director Xander, Vikaash Khdloya, Executive Director and CEO Embassy REIT, Pavitra Shankar, Managing Director for Brigade Group, and finally, my dear friend and co-host for this evening, Abhishek Goenka at Aeka Advisors, and I'll request him to kickstart the session with his initial comments. Abhishek?
Sure. Thank you, Rahul. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us. I think, as Rahul said, enough has already been spoken, written, heard about the budget. And what we're hoping all of us can do today is bring that slightly more insightful perspective, having had the opportunity of a day to read through what the fine print had in store. From a tax perspective, and I know some of you all will perhaps cover it, the general view that I would have is that while it's very commendable that there be no changes in the rates and having a consistent tax policy is very, very important, I think where the government misses the point is on trying to keep tax policy simple, right? I think they really need to start believing that simple is the new sophisticated, because every change that they bring, let me just give you the most obvious example that we're all somewhat happy about, which is the rate for individuals reducing, comes with so many ifs and buts and scenarios, and you can do this, but you have to then give up this, but you can slide into this only one time, and then if you slide out again, you're losing this, is almost a sort of puzzle that even expert practitioners like us struggle to figure out. I think the other thing is that the government needs to stop feeling somewhat shy of saying we need to collect tax. Because if you see the budget, it's all about this is what we're giving away, this is what we're giving away, this is what we're giving away. And then the rest of the year, through what they do on the ground is how they try and get back everything that they've given away, right? So I think it's very critical for them to say, here's our growth target, here's how we want to spend money to spur the economy, here's are the focus areas, whether it's defense or capital or whatever. And therefore, this is the tax we need. Here are the areas or sectors with whom we're going to go after and collect the taxes. These are the few sectors that we're going to give a leeway to, and this is how we're going to make up our money, right? So I think that gives very clear messaging to everyone as to what the government's tax policy is. Right now, it always ends up being a little bit of a band-aid that, okay, this sector cried very hard, so let's give them something, and this sector is making a lot of money, their stocks are doing well, or somebody tried to play too cute, so let's sort of go and punish them. Anyway, that's just sort of a more macro perspective. We'll deal with some of the more specific changes to the real estate sector as we go along. What I'd love to do now is sort of bring all our panelists in one by one and just request them to give their views on the budget in general, maybe going beyond the economic scenario, and of course, speaking about the real estate sector and their specific sort of company contributions. Pavitra, if I may start with you, please. Pavitra, you may have to unmute in case you're on mute.
Yes, I was on mute. 2.5 years did not change that habit. But good evening to everyone, and thanks for having me on this panel. Thanks, Abhishek, for that introduction. I think the way I've approached it is, of course, to assume that everybody has some idea in terms of what has actually been announced as part of the budget. So what I just like to give is maybe some additional color as we see it, and then I know we're going to go into more detail. So of course, overall, when looking through everything, it seems that more or less industry across the board is pretty happy or okay with the budget based on all of the sectors that have responded. Of course, the best change has been on the individual, as you've also mentioned. In general, I think the focus on infrastructure spending is positive, while a lot of us feel that maybe real estate specifically, there were measures that could have been mentioned or introduced for the real estate sector. I think overall spending on infrastructure does help the overall country and economy as a whole. And the increase in doing that to 3.3% of GDP is a step in the right direction. Also, in terms of the overall connectivity for the country, smaller airports, smaller regions, that will definitely help in terms of connecting smaller cities, tier 2, tier 3 cities. And that means there is an opportunity for real estate developers in those markets to find good opportunities and expand in their in the smaller markets. Many of us here are obviously focusing on tier 1 markets. So down the, later in the session, I'd also be curious to know how many of us would actually be looking at tier 2, tier 3 when most of our focus is on scaling, and then large markets tend to help us scale a little better than maybe spreading our efforts over multiple smaller markets. So that's one thought that we at Brigade definitely have. What is the opportunity really in tier 2 and tier 3 cities for larger listed players, for example? One of the other aspects that we noticed was the extension of tax benefits to funds relocating to GIFT City. Again, that's one aspect that we noticed because we do have office development in GIFT City and a hotel. And I think this is positive because many of the tenants and potential clients there are looking for the extension of those benefits, and also the single window clearance that they have communicated that they will implement over there. A lot of the tenants and clients have issues, just trying to figure out the paperwork and making things easier for them to have a presence there. So I think the talk about GIFT City from 2014 till now, there does seem to be a little more attention, and we do hope that that is something that will bear fruit for that specific market. On the personal income tax, that's something Abhishek already mentioned. There is a lot of focus driving people to adopt the new regime, but there's no extension of the benefits in the old regime or any kind of enhancement there. So it does make it extremely complicated for many people who might want to consider this. And even under the new regime, there's actually, no real, help in terms of mortgage income or any kind of deduction or anything like that. Another talking point which we've all been discussing is the capping of the capital gains benefit at the max of 10 crores for house property. Obviously, that caters to a very small sector of individuals and maybe some large corporates who might have invested or whatever. So from our side, we do see that could have a potential negative impact on demand for ultra luxury. But again, as we know, the 80-20 rule, it's not really going to impact the housing market overall in general, of course, ultra luxury. But then again, not sure how much that will really impact willingness of people to, step away from investing in ultra luxury homes because of this specific tax. Overall, since we are a multi-domain business, we are in residential, office, retail, and hospitality. For this time, actually, there have been some good measures announced for development of tourism. That's something I think we are positive about. The government is looking to boost tourism. They've picked specific 50 projects and 50 airports and so on to expand the infrastructure as well. So I think that would also be a welcome move. Again, these are smaller markets, so overall for the country it's great. But again, I'm curious for larger developers, how do we select those smaller markets, and who is going to go into those smaller markets? But in general, I think it is positive for the sector as a whole. Just very quickly, a few misses. I think the Desh bill, we were all waiting for some kind of extension or some information about it. That seems to have been missed. Real estate sector always asks about GST and loss of input tax credit. The GST rates on cement is still incredibly high. And since we don't have the ITC, it is a huge pain point for developers. Again, while there was focus on PMAY, no real change on the affordable housing cap, which is still at 45 lakhs despite being announced in 2019. So in terms of, at least Brigade has looked at affordable housing, but we found that it isn't nearly as lucrative as just maybe looking at catering to the existing market demand anyway, which tends to be in mid-segment housing. So I think if we really wanted to focus on affordable, there's a long way to go if we're really looking at housing for all. Yeah. And of course, no infra status. So for the real estate sector.
Thank you.
Those were just my takeaways. Thanks.
Oh, super. Thanks a lot, Pavitra. Sanjeev, if I could request you to come in and please give us your overall perspective on the budget.
Sure. Definitely, I would say the things that I liked about the budget, I think the fiscal consolidation, strong collection on tax revenues. Also, I think both these things matter, especially given that the currency has been on a slide for almost about 12 months. So the fact that the government's borrowings, etc., will be, contained, will help the currency. The other thing, of course, is I think which was mentioned was the infrastructure thrust. I think infrastructure spend is always a big boost for real estate, directly and indirectly. So I think seeing the focus on that, and hopefully on the back of that, it creates a multiplier effect, or at least an impetus for the private sector to also step up on its capex plans. The things that were not so great, of course, I think the Desh policy of I'm hoping that is going to come through. I think there are millions and millions of square feet of SEZ space across the country and billions of dollars of capital which are at risk. And it's really, really imperative that this issue is addressed. The one other thing which was not a great development was the fact that the lower withholding tax on debt instruments was, that's been getting renewed now for, I think, maybe, I don't know, last 15, 16 years. And this is the first time that it's actually not been renewed. And that is a very, very big attraction for foreign investors. And given that the country is going to need a significant amount of debt in the years to come for these investment plans, I think it definitely doesn't help. So, I think that's something which, hopefully they will reconsider. That'd be great if they can. But all in all, I think in summary, I'd say it's actually a pretty good budget. And the fact that despite 2 years of COVID, India has been able to, consolidate fiscally when governments worldwide have just spent money and increased their debt, I think is actually a pretty good outcome.
Yeah, great, Sanjeev. Thank you. Vikaash, I'm going to bring you next. I know you've been tracking the Desh bill very, very actively. So would love to get your comments on that. But before that, if you could also come in and share your general comments, please, on the budget.
Yeah, sure, Abhishek. So thank you for having me over. So in general, we think the budget is a pretty balanced budget, as the other panelists mentioned. I think a lot of fiscal prudence and a huge capex push. So I think that will overall really help economy. Tax collections have been robust. GDP, the deficit that they have targeted 6.4% of GDP. I think that's pretty. It shows that there's consolidation happening at the fiscal front. I think overall a good budget. I think from a real estate perspective, especially commercial real estate, not specific just to REITs, I think it's been a bit of a negative. What we're looking at from a real estate perspective after the pandemic is enabling environment. especially for large landowners like REITs who are permanent asset owners, right? That helps to recycle capital, that helps the other developers to take more risk and part the assets with REIT who have access to more foreign capital. I think both taxation of some of the amortization periods, a portion of the distribution, we can speak about it later. I think that's a big negative, and I think a lot of advocacy that needs to happen there. Plus, as you mentioned, Desh will. So just to give you statistics, 130 million square feet, 180 million square feet roughly of SEZ space, 30 million square feet vacant today. And just enabling the industry to have denotification of these 30 million square feet strata available SEZ space really helps a huge investment push both from a client perspective and also industry. So I think some of these aspects have been negative, plus industry was waiting for some clarity on enabling or allowing banks to invest with REITs through debt. So that's not come through. So overall, I would say while it's been positive for most other sectors, for commercial real estate, it's been a bit disappointing. And I think it will impact both foreign inflows into India, whether it's through the REITs or the investors who are potentially looking for REIT listing as a potential exit for the investments, as well as in general investment into commercial real estate and recycling, given the Desh will.
Thanks, Vikaash. Tina, may I request you to share your opening thoughts, please?
Yeah, thank you, Abhishek, and good evening, everyone. I think overall it is a good budget. Like the previous years, this budget too is forward-looking and will keep the momentum going for the country's growth. What I particularly like is that instead of solving for only specific issues, the FM has maintained her focus on the big picture. Obviously, there's a lot more allocation to infrastructure than real estate, but our sector has seen its fair share of reforms over the past 5 years. And the emphasis of this government has been on growth, compliance, and transparency. We've seen RERA, we've seen GST, we've seen streamlining of our direct tax administration. And all of these reforms have impacted our industry in a positive way. So although this budget may not have a lot of, gives for the real estate sector, but overall the sector has improved over the last 5 years. And that has helped in improving investor confidence and transparency and compliance. And today India is uniquely positioned because not only have we put our house in order, but the world is looking towards us, not only because of the large attractive market that we offer, the favorable demographic, but also because of economic and geopolitical factors elsewhere in the world. We have a much stronger and more attractive investment destination to offer. And specific to real estate, I think we have seen that post-COVID, people are now returning to work and flight to quality, learnings from COVID. An increased focus on ESG will redefine our office spaces and our housing sector in a big way.
Thank you, Tina. Arpit, may I request you to come in, please?
Thank you, Abhishek, Rahul, and the teams for setting this up and inviting us over. I think as all of the previous panelists have said, I would concur completely. I think the overall message from the budget is the summary is positive. This is the 9th running budget of this current political dispensation. It's a pre-election budget. It's never an easy time to be kind of giving out growth-focused policies at that time. That said, in light of the global environment as well, 2022 overall has been generally a very volatile and a difficult period globally for economies. The fact that Indian economy has been able to hold its ground throughout the period in general, post a robust growth rate of 6.5 to 7%, and continue to do so for the next year. I think all of those are positives. These are positives which are now achieved by the generally consistent themes that the government has focused on around sustainability, digital inclusion, financial inclusion, infrastructure spending, and capex. Right? These would be the 4 or 5 big things that the government has been focusing on, and the previous budgets have kind of targeted over the last 4 or 5 years. They seem to be consistently being held through this year as well. Obviously, the income tax piece gives a bit of a populist push to the government as well, which I think is also, as Abhishek said, also comes with its own set of conditions. The only thing which I would like to say is that as couple of the panelists have already highlighted, some lack of clarity around critical legislations which impact our industry, specifically real estate, Desh Act, also. So that is a bit confusing. I think if we can get some, we would have been happy if some of that would have come through right now itself. But yes, I think they're focusing on the big picture, as Tina said, and some of those things maybe hopefully will get resolved in due course of time. But overall, feel positive. Real estate wise, neutral, slight positive, slight negative, so neutral. I think there are a couple of important pieces which we'll touch upon when we get into the detail, which do impact overall attractiveness of real estate as an investment and real estate investment into India. The interest rate piece which Vikaash mentioned and the Desh Act, and some of these things are a bit negative actually from the investment climate point of view, but we'll touch upon it in a bit more detail as we go across. But overall, generally positive, real estate neutral.
Super. Thanks, Arpit, and Sudarshan. We're waiting to get your thoughts.
Great. Thank you everyone for having me. I mean, everyone's more or less covered all the most important points, but keeping infrastructure as one of the core focus areas for the government is something which at least I'm very bullish about, because that is the need of the hour. At least we are focused on industrial and warehousing sector in a predominant basis, and for us to be a competitive export-oriented market on an industrial output standpoint, I think your logistics cost is one of the biggest cost, which does not make us so attractive at the same time. Apart from that, with this new focus on this industry 4.0, focus on job training, for industry 4.0 skills to the youth, with the PM Kaushal Vikas Yojana, I think it's a very, very important parameter. While we have the youth of literally the youngest nation more or less in the next 2 decades, but it's also important for them to be as equally skilled to take up and be, while everyone keeps talking of us as China +1, I think why no one's focusing us as China in itself. Why are we a second option? Why not the first option? So this is a move. Both the moves, in my opinion, are moves where we are inching towards that. Obviously, we are far away, but that's one of my biggest positive takeaways from this budget.
Thank you, Sudarshan. Sudarshan, just staying with you, yields on residential assets just continue to be subpar, right? What in your mind is really required to re-energize the residential markets?
So one thing which we've seen generally from an investor mindset, right? Like at least let's take 5 years as an example. It used to be close to 60% investment market in residential and 40%, it used to be an end user, and that has drastically changed in the last 4-5 years. Obviously, COVID has spurred the demand for people to own houses in a large way, and that you've seen record sales everywhere. One thing is now you're talking about 70% end users and 30% residential investment market, right? So we definitely advise people never to invest in residential beyond your own house or another holiday home for yourself. So people owning more than that, at least in today's time, it is going to deteriorate your capital rather than make capital for you. And with the amount of options people have in alternative real estate in general, or alternative fixed income products, or multiple other options, and it's become such a digital world that it's much more easier for people to deploy capital, which was not the case about 5 years back at least, right? So that is there. So from a residential real estate market, I think it's always continuously going to keep inching towards more and more an end use market than an investment market. Pavitra's point of tier 2, very, very bullish about tier 2 markets. Work from home is a phenomena. People are there. Looking at Kochi as an example itself, where reverse migration has been the highest to consider. I mean, obviously the local demand for residential is also going to go up because people are going to reverse. I mean, people have reverse migrated and are going want to stay there, right? So my view is very difficult to spur the residential investment market vis-a-vis, like how Vikash's firm REITs have educated people. There's more to residential real estate investment than, why don't you look at REITs also as a product in itself and what we offer as a product? It's going to be more and more difficult, in my opinion, because investors are getting aware and are wanting to put money in more safer, but at the same time make better rental and make better returns for their investment.
Great, thanks. Vikaash, I'm going to come back to you on the point on the taxation changes relating to REITs. I think that's one of the most talked about tax changes. If you will, for the benefit of our audience, just sort of give a little more color to that, and also just sort of tell us how you see this playing out in terms of the impact both for issuers and for investors.
Abhishek. So actually, couple of things. So one, what the tax law proposes is one of the components of distribution. We have three components of distributions which we make every quarter. One of the components be taxed, which hitherto the understanding of the industry was is not taxable, be taxed at the maximum rate. So whether it's 39% for individuals or 43% for foreign investors, and that's kind of spooked the market and investors a little bit because it's kind of something which they thought is pretty settled. So let me just take a step back here. What do REITs do? REITs own quality real estate, in our case, commercial office properties all over the country, huge scale. In fact, we are one of the largest globally. In Asia, we are the largest by size. And we aim to provide stable and predictable cash flows to investors. So that's the distribution yield, the quarterly distributions that we make. And over a period of time, capital appreciation through all the growth levers that we have in the company, whether it's mark to market, leasing up, or developing new product or acquiring new properties. So the REIT as a product is sold as or marketed as a total return product, with distribution being a very important component, the regular predictable distribution, whether it's a retiree or whether it's a young individual. And the distribution comprises of three components. And what the budget proposes to do is one of the components which we call or name as amortization of SPV debt, which is just a mechanism to extract cash from the asset SPVs, which generate the cash flow from the properties and the rents we collect to the trust and to our unit holders. It proposes to tax that at the maximum marginal rate. What that means, in effect, is from an investor perspective, whether retail investor or foreign institutional investor, is that it reduces their distribution yield. So the return that they're getting. So for example, if we were delivering 6.5% pre-tax, charging a tax on one of the components of distribution, which was about 40% of the total distribution, would mean that there's 100 basis points impact on the distribution yield. And of course, that also means the total returns, the distribution plus the capital appreciation, the total returns also reduced by that extent. That's pretty negative from individual investor perspective, especially Abhishek, because we have seen about 18x increase in retail investors since we got listed. And there have been, of course, other REITs as well. So this was a product which was, really gaining popularity with retail investors. It was a product which provides stable, predictable cash flow. It's a medium return, low risk product. And India really needs investment in these kind of products, both from investor perspective as well as from a company perspective, because it helps to recycle capital. And of course, while the industry, it impacts the entire industry. So the industry is going to make advocacy efforts, and there's a lot of rationale behind why this should not be the case and why the tax should not be charged. But I think as of now, negative, and there's been a lot of effort that the industry needs to put together to rationalize with the government of what needs to be done, which is appropriate.
No, certainly agree with that, Vikaash. And Arpit, just bringing you in, since Vikaash is talking about advocacy, this change where the withholding for foreign debt investors is going to now potentially go up to 15% from 5%. We all know that a healthy sort of leverage is very critical to ensure suitable equity returns. Do you see this causing some kind of slowdown or repricing of deals?
Sanjeev already mentioned about this, that this has kind of come as a bit of a surprise, I think, to all of us as international investors into the real estate market in India, because this has been something which has been continuing and being provided for a long time, and this is the first time it's being not extended. So Abhishek, the way that I think about something like this is that everywhere in the world right now we see cost of investments, cost of capital going up because of the cycles which are playing out globally everywhere, going up in multiples. For example, right, the cost of debt in US in Q1 of 2022 compared to cost of debt in US in Q1 of 2023 is at 5x of what it was for a product of a similar nature. What was costing 100 basis points is costing 500 basis points. That because of market movement. Now, at that point of time, when we basically are a emerging developing economy, wanting to get long-term capital in, a structural change like this, which changes our cost of getting debt capital into our investments, is gone up by 10% effectively. It's by the difference between 5 and 15 is gone up by 10%. So that causes cost of capital for debt to increase for bringing that capital in. I could maybe see one logic in that we don't want debt capital into generating growth in the country and infrastructure, but we want equity capital. That could be one argument. Hence, we are disincentivizing debt investments, and hence we want more long-term capital. But actually, this debt capital was never short-term capital. This was always supposed to be long-term credit capital, which comes in 3 to 5 year horizons at the minimum, and that's when we put in or when we get debt capital infused into our equity investments. It comes with that type of time horizon. So even that kind of argument doesn't kind of really hold good in my opinion. So yes, it will impact the overall cost of making acquisitions. Now, just linking it back to what Vikaash was saying, that through the change in policy, the return profile of the REITs is getting impacted. At the same time, through this, the return for, let's say, acquisition of or development of new real estate infrastructure in the country is getting impacted. So I see this being a bit of a negative impact on it. Markets self-correct over a period of time and kind of find solutions. I think the alternate solution to something like this will be onshore financing, which is available. But the problem with that financing is it's not available for all use cases. It's only available right now in the country for certain use cases. And where it's not available on those use cases, end users, it is going to become a bit more costly and a bit more difficult to do those type of investments, whether we talk about, and where especially one of the key things would be development. What we've seen in real estate development of late over the last 3, 4, 5 years, because of the credit crunch in general impacting the real estate industry since the NBFC crisis happened post INFS issues, development credit has not been very open and very forthcoming. And with this, it might put another negative lever onto development of new infrastructure, because this credit was financing some of that, but it might slow down a bit more. So I do see this as a bit of a negative. How it will self-correct if the Indian domestic financial institutions pick up pace. On the other side, it can be balanced out. I don't see that immediately happening, because that's again a medium-term change and rather than a short-term change.
Pavitra, I know you've been tracking the sort of domestic credit availability and specifically for the sector. Just to sort of build on where Arpit left it, saying that perhaps the shortfall on foreign capital may have to be fulfilled by growth in the domestic debt markets. Do you see that happening in the short term, and where do you think the impediments lie?
So I would say, of course, there was a major impact a couple of years ago with the ILNFS and the fallout from that. Those developers who are pretty well capitalized, conservative, have not seen any kind of shortage in terms of availability of credit, if that is the case, whether it is residential, commercial, office, even hospitality for that matter now. Obviously, after the pandemic effects have kind of worn off, that really hasn't been too much of an issue if the borrower has a good standing financially. So we have not seen those kind of issues, but anecdotally, I'm actually surprised to see how many people have gotten second lives, in terms of the assets that were in trouble, lands that they were holding and basically had financed at 16, 17%. We're actually still hearing of developers or land bankers who've been able to get new debt again at those kind of rates. So while it is good that the appetite is there again, I'm not sure how great it is for the overall market for lands to actually transact or actually get developed at reasonable kind of valuations. But that also means that because because there is debt funding available at those kind of rates, it's also very hard to get equity funding at much higher rates of return, right? Because if someone's able to give a loan and get 16 to 17% on that, if they're looking at equity returns for investments, they're asking 20% and upwards, which many of us may try to underwrite, but we know the reality on the ground is potentially different. So that's what we're seeing in terms of credit availability.
Yeah, taking a cue from that, Sanjeev, pretty much I would say on this panel, we already have half of the active foreign equity investors, who are active in India. What do you think is preventing more deepening of the foreign equity investors coming into India, right? I mean, it's the same 8, 10, 12 names that we've seen over the last decade or so. All other sectors, we're seeing so many newer players. We're seeing all the right noises are being made, all the right structural changes are being made. But still, equity investors into real estate from foreign markets are still sitting slow.
So, well, I mean, I would actually beg to differ in terms of the breadth of investors. Actually, we are seeing newer names, especially on the pension side. I think if you look at, let's say, the top 10 global investors in the world in alternative assets and real estate, I think we already have all of them here. And they probably represent a good 60-70% of the capital that gets made available to alternative assets. What we are seeing, especially, and in Singapore, many of these firms have set up their offices. The next rung of pensions that are smaller are also actually coming in. But I mean, I must say that I do agree that the quantum of capital that is coming into equity still remains small. I mean, equity investment, let's face it, I mean, it's really a tough thing to do in India. So the segments where people are willing to take development risk, I think, are some of the newer asset classes. Like, for example, like if somebody wants to invest in data centers, there's really no debt opportunity there. And at the same time, there's very little high quality asset class available to acquire. So you have to develop. So if somebody wants to play in that kind of a product, then clearly equity is the only real option. Is equity going to come into asset classes like residential from foreign investors? I doubt it. I mean, most of that will go into listed companies that in India that are in the real estate space. The format in which money has started coming in over the last 3-4 years, which is actually encouraging, is platforms, really. I mean, big global investors coming into platforms where they partner with a developer across a specific asset class, across multiple projects. And they also tend to be fairly active in those platforms. I mean, they have significant say over business plan execution, if it's a commercial project on leasing and so on. So that, I think, is itself actually a fairly encouraging development.
Great. And Sanjeev, very quickly, you talked about data centers, just sort of your view on thematically where this is going for India.
So, I mean, India is actually one of the fastest growing markets in Asia for sure in data centers. I think it offers a lot of or rather, it has a lot of drivers as to why this asset class has taken so much attention. I mean, it's had a CAGR of almost 25% upwards over the last 3-4 years. The entry of the big hyperscalers who are expanding their cloud infrastructure offerings, the growth of mobile data, the data localization laws. And the government in India is today becoming increasingly a huge customer for data centers because it's digitalizing at a furious pace. I mean, it's pretty commendable how digital the government has become over the last few years. So I think those are some of the things which make data centers attractive. I think the one very interesting thing about India as a data center market is also the rise of the renewable energy business in India. India is today the third largest generation capacity country globally. And so there's a real opportunity to do green data centers in India, which is not easy to do in many other places.
Yeah, just staying with green, Tina, I wanted to bring you in. Just hearing all the emphasis that the finance minister had, if I were to make a prediction, I think real estate will be the first sector that has some mandate officially put out for it to start getting into a carbon neutral zone. I'm sure at Hines you'll have seen this from close quarters. You'll are leaders in this field. What do you think players in India can do proactively on this front?
I completely agree with you, Abhishek. I think we will very soon have carbon goals defined by the government. But even before that, today we are seeing that our investors are extremely focused on ESG. And therefore, defining and achieving carbon goals is the need of the hour for all real estate players like us. It is global investors continue to place high priority on integration of ESG criteria into investment strategies. Our tenants are demanding ESG reporting and defining the requirements in the lease deeds that we are writing. So, therefore, I think to be able to meet the net zero targets, we will have to proactively focus on sustainable design, construction, and operations, monitoring embodied carbon to the extent possible during the construction phase, and we are as it is we are building reporting requirements in all the construction documents, construction contracts that we are writing these days. On the acquisition side, whenever acquiring a building, we have to prioritize the purchase of buildings with green certifications or retrofitting existing properties to enhance energy efficiency, water usage, and wellness. So that's, I think, all of us should be focusing on to be able to meet any targets that are later defined by the government on carbon neutrality.
Sure. Rahul, let me come to the question that actually defines every conversation around real estate, which is the growth in office leasing. I think everyone's perspective is that the growth of GCCs is offsetting the layoffs at big tech. Do you agree with that? And where do you see the office leasing markets in India in the near term?
So, Abhishek, global capability centers, they've contributed immensely over the last 2 years, especially. Of course, they've been contributing to the real estate for a very, very long time. But over the last 2 years, especially 18 months, if I were to be specific, we've seen about 60% of Grade A demand, or almost 21 million square feet of office space being leased by global capability centers, which is a massive number, which obviously is primarily because of the cost arbitrage and human capital that India has to offer, right? Clearly. Overall, like I said, about 44% share of active space requirements today also is contributed by GCCs, large GCC center, and they are becoming the largest industry segment, if I can call it that, in terms of the potential growth for Indian real estate. And as per our data that we have recently reviewed, about 40 to 50 million square feet of GCC occupied space will come up for renewals in the next 12 to 18 months. Now, mind you, these are companies who really do not really negotiate on rentals. These are not the guys who really look at lower end of real estate. They look at really high quality of office spaces. And ESG becoming prominent, these clients have started looking at evaluating opportunities that are high quality, better than what was already on offer. And we expect that this will give a boost to newer good quality assets that are coming up around us in the country. I sense that while we've had a relatively slow start to 2023, we had a good 2022. Typically, we enter the year with a certain amount of business in hand. We've kind of lost out on those large ones, and I think it's because a lot of the large occupiers that I speak with, or the teams are talking with, are in planning stage with global headwinds. There has been a slowdown, but as things get better, as things open up, I believe that Indian leasing market will see a big boost over the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, inshallah to that. Arpit, just coming to you for some comments on the sort of alternate class of industrial. The focus thus far seems to have only been on warehousing. Do you see, with all the PLI push and everything else, some of the more institutional players moving into other alternate industrial asset classes like factories, manufacturing parks, and so on?
No, Abhishek, 100%. I think Sudarshan mentioned about infrastructure push. So there's obviously, I think we are very behind on the on-ground infrastructure, but I think we are one of the leaders in digital infrastructure, which is the work which Sanjeev also mentioned, and the data center part becomes relevant there. I think from an industrial logistics point of view, yes, the focus over the last, if you would say, over the last 7, 8, 9 years on development of that real estate asset class has been on logistics and warehousing, because that's the product which the tenants and the occupiers have been demanding, and wherever possible, investors, real estate investors, have been trying to kind of get into that asset class. Going forward, as the government's push on manufacturing with PLI schemes, electronics, R&D, which is again a push within this current budget as well, high-tech manufacturing, when all of that starts happening, it will take a bit of time because that's a slow-moving wheel, and it's something that currently will be announced. It's been announced for the last 2 years. Will start showing up in 24, 25 in terms of real large quantum projects. Some of them have started to be announced close to some of the industrial clusters that we have. Once that starts to happen, along with that, the requirement of the underlying infrastructure would also increase. The first wave will always be like it has been in other industries, whether it be office. The first wave will be of people who would like to own their own factories and their manufacturing facilities, because they would want them to be captive because of IP reasons, etc. Then there'll be the second growth phase, which should come from people who don't want to spend expertise and time and capital on some things which an expert could do for them better. Which is where I think the opportunity for real estate specialists and investors and operators would come in. We do see this as a big theme for the future, similar to what Sanjeev mentioned about data centers. But I think it's 3-4 years early for it to really start requiring large amounts of inbound capital investments into it. But I think 25, 26, it would definitely be one of the asset classes that people will talk about. And I think if all goes as per the government's plan, not our plan, in which they want to push manufacturing, currently 15, 16% of GDP to 25%, double engines of growth, that's how you get to 5 trillion economy. If that happens, then I think it will be maybe 50-50, maybe beyond that would be what logistics industrial will look like 3-4 years out, with manufacturing and factories and facilities of that nature picking up a lot of investment from global institutional investors as well. And that's long-term, stable. Maybe then Vikaash can add some of those facilities into his REIT, because it's going to be stable, income generating, 20-30 year leases. Some of those things really stack up from what a real estate investors want.
And Tina, quickly, do you also see revival in some of the alternate categories on housing, worker housing, student housing, some of those things picking up?
Some of those have always been there for a number of years already. We ourselves, as Xander, have invested into some of those platforms for a while. The problem over there is one of the questions that you asked when you were checking the Sudarshan. Some of the underlying unit economics dynamics are not very crystal clear, and that kind of goes back to how residential is as an asset class in India, that basically you take loan at 8%, and if it doesn't capital appreciate, you're basically negative yielding 5%. So because the yield on rent is 3%. So which is very unique to India. It doesn't happen like that in other markets generally. In US, it's accretive by 2.5%. You take a loan at 3%, you yield 5% on resi. And hence it's one of the largest real estate investment asset classes in the US, almost similar to what office is. So, but I think some of those themes are, yes, I think as a growing real estate market, some of those themes will start developing, have already started developing, but they will take their own due course before they become sizable.
Tina, just a couple of quick thoughts on you on this topic, on the alternate.
I agree with Arpit that unit economics are not very favorable currently for affordable housing. However, there's a huge demand gap, I think almost 20 million homes or so. And there is a government intent through the Prime Minister Awas Yojana, and the outlay to this initiative keeps increasing every year. But for affordable housing to become attractive, government needs to work extra to increase margins for developers, because profitable businesses, will lead to supply. There is no other way. Currently, premium real estate is more profitable, and with mid-market and premium housing reviving, I think the supply of affordable housing is likely to come down unless developers are offered more FAR or lower land prices, subsidy on materials, lower tax rates, faster approvals. All these things will go a long way, I think, in improving the supply of affordable housing, and the demand already is there.
Sure. Great. Before I hand it back to Rahul for some of the questions coming from the audience, Pavitra, if I may put you a little on the spot and say, when do you think we'll see an Indian real estate brand go global?
I think there are a lot of factors for that. First of all, there's a huge opportunity within India. Also, I mean, since you put me on the spot, I'm going to say a lot of things that maybe I can't mitigate, my comments on. So first of all, there's a huge opportunity within India. The way we build, market, construct, all of that is very specific to India per se. I think if you have to do the same in a more developed market, or go outside, or maybe a more mature real estate market, I think the game is substantially different. Today, we are still financing most of our residential projects with, customer advances. In many of these countries, you can't do that. You can take 10% and then you have to borrow. And sometimes the economics don't work out that great. I mean, if you look at most of the listed real estate players today, and many others who are not listed also, most of us are self-financing the projects. When I say self-finance, again, it's with customer advances, right? Of course, RERA is there, you're doing construction-based milestones, but our residential debt is next to zero. So the rules of the game tend to change if you're going somewhere else. I also think there has to be a lot more focus on planning, quality, actually investing the time into the planning and design. And I know Tina will know that from Hines, like that's a very, very important aspect of development in, say, the US or any other country, even in China or whatever. Without that, you can't really meet the end customer goal, meet the timelines, all of that. So I think it does take a lot more maturity and perhaps a lot more access to huge amounts of capital if that were to be the case. And we still see a lot of opportunity within India today.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Pavitra, for that candor. Rahul, why don't I hand it back to you? We have a few minutes. Maybe we can pick up some of the questions I see coming from the audience.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Abhishek, and thank you, everyone. I think we've got many, but I don't know if in the next 7-8 minutes we can cover all of them. Let me start with you, Abhishek, because you've been asking all the questions all this while. So which sector in core real estate is likely to be benefited more in terms of investment inflow in next few years?
The sector within real estate which will be benefited the most?
In core real estate, yes.
Yeah, I think office will still remain the sweet spot within the sector.
Yeah, looks like that. And excellent. Vikaash, can we see any rental correction in the coming months as most of the IT companies are laying off employees, and obviously hybrid has kind of taken over. Not more than 50% people are coming back. So do you think any city where you are present, you've seen these kind of demands coming in, or you expect any corrections?
So briefly on this, I think the quick answer is for the Grade A properties, the best-in-class properties which focus on ESG wellness, held by institutional landlord. It's a big no, which means we're actually seeing rental growth. In fact, as a recent report said, had seen 11% rental growth last year. So we're actually seeing global occupiers, as you mentioned, Rahul, earlier. Rent is a very small component of the overall cost base. Right. $1 to $1.5 a foot a month. I often say it's embarrassingly low rents in India. So I think that's not the concern. The point is, I think one of the segments of the customer base, which is the IT services companies, they have been slow to ramp up people back to work. And that's a concern. And cities or properties which are catering to such kind of occupiers, let's say a Hindewadi in Pune, let's say, some grade B property, I think those are in for a little bit of a challenge unless, they cater to global captives and, companies like banks and, retail companies and healthcare captives. So I think in general, we are very positive in rental growth, except for markets, micro markets, which are catering to IT services companies, or except for properties which are not grade A+.
No, I agree with you. Rentals, we've in fact, during the pandemic as well, we did not see rentals correcting in almost all of the key markets. I think I tend to agree with you. Thanks. Sanjeev, I think this one is for you. There's 33% increase in capital expenditure. That's about 3.3% of GDP. Is this a really high deployment for infrastructure development?
Yeah, it's definitely, it is a very material number. And I think what it will do is it'll also prompt more investment from private infrastructure companies. So I do think it's material.
Right. Sudarshan, how do you see the current global headwinds impact, and what do you think makes Indian economy more resilient?
Well, we're still the second fastest growing economy. Our GDP growth rate is the highest among the world. We are projected to be the fourth largest economy in the world as well. I think global headwinds don't matter to India as much because our local consumption is also very, very high. Government's push to infrastructure is one, and like I said, I'm a firm believer for industrial manufacturing in India as a sector. So, we will be continuing to export while we are China plus one. I think 10, 20 years from now, we'll be the China as well. So definitely don't see any global headwinds impacting in a long term, at least short terms, many things can happen. But in a long term standpoint, I think we're here to benefit a lot more than lose as such.
Excellent. I love the enthusiasm and positivity, man. That's what helps. I have the last one for Pavitra. Pavitra, Brigade obviously is present in several tier 2 cities. With setting up of urban infra development fund for tier 2 and 3 cities, do you see more real estate action in such cities across residential space? And would you look at other tier 2 or tier 3 cities as part of your future expansion?
Yeah, I think definitely there's a huge opportunity in tier 2, tier 3. I don't know if many people remember, because it was 20 years ago, Bangalore was just a sleepy pensioner's paradise. And now we were just talking before the call started that almost all of us are based in Bangalore. So one of these could be the next Bangalore, right? And that's something I always think about, which is that place and can I be there? But I think there's huge opportunity for those cities. But if someone's trying to figure out which that city is, there's just too many options. And potentially you need to figure out as an organization, what's the best focus of your bandwidth that you have today. For some of us, there is constant pressure to keep scaling. And scaling from very small markets today, I don't see if there's a case for a first mover advantage. So maybe we'll just keep our eyes open and then look at trends and then eventually get into some smaller tier 2 markets. We've always been in Mysore, for example. Mysore has done nothing over the last 20 to 25 years. But since the road connectivity has recently improved, there's a lot of talk about Mysore coming up again. So in that sense, whatever capex the government is promising to help infrastructure, connectivity with airports and so on, I think there's a lot of opportunity. The question is who's going to get that opportunity?
Yeah. And I love the start of the response. Semi-urban town, as we used to call it when we started, of course. So
I'm a Bangalore girl, so I'm very biased. I'm very happy this happened. So.
Yeah. Wonderful. I think those are the questions that we got, and that's all we have time for. To conclude, I think on an overall basis, the panel believes that the focus on startups, on manufacturing capacity building in the country is all positive for job creation. The investment on economy, infrastructure, obviously is a positive, and the need for more real estate will get created both in office space and greenfield manufacturing facilities. The budget is balanced, but obviously misses out on key real estate sector demands and specific about operationalization of various announcements. Tangible action points over the course of the next financial year would be awaited to see real on-ground activity. And obviously, not to forget that Sudarshan obviously has made it clear that it's not China +1, but it's minus China very, very soon, maybe 10 to 15 years. So on that positive note, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for your contribution. Thank you to all the attendees for taking out time, about 230 of you. Thanks. And for asking questions. Marketing and COE teams of Aeka Advisors and JLL for putting this together, and to the panelists for making this interesting. Have a good rest of the evening, people.
Thank you, Rahul, and thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.